friends, welcome back to my channel. I feel a little intimidated doing this considering how epic in scope this story is, and I am so far from the first person to review this book, but here it goes. Today I'm going to be reviewing and giving my thoughts on The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, the first book in the Stormlight Archive fantasy series. The Way of Kings takes place on a planet called Roshar, which is plagued by extreme weather events called high storms, which regularly sweep across the globe, and as a result, many of the life forms on Roshar have evolved to protect themselves against these events, such as animals that have hard chitinous shells and plants that are able to close up or retract when disturbed. So in the present day, there is an ongoing war between the Alethi people and the Parshendi. The Parshendi were responsible for the murder of the Alethi king Gavilar several years before, on a night that a peace treaty was to be signed between the two peoples. In retaliation, the Vengeance Pact was formed between the high princes of Alethi. They would band together and fight to avenge their fallen king on a huge expanse of plateaus called the Shattered Plains. Unfortunately, returning to the present day, things have basically devolved to where instead of working together towards a common goal, each of the 10 high princes are essentially competing against one another for glory and power. Some important elements to this world among many include the existence of things called spren that populate this world. They're physical manifestations of emotions and ideas, such as pain spren that appear as tiny orange grasping hands when someone is injured on a battlefield, or creation spren that appear as shifting silvery shapes when someone is drawing or painting something. There exists among some cultures, including the Alethi, a hierarchy based on a person's eye color. Those of high standing socially and politically are called light eyes, who have predictably light colored eyes, and those of low standing called dark eyes. So one of our main characters is a dark eyes called Kaladin Stormblessed, a young ex-soldier turned slave who serves the army of one of the Alethi high princes. Throughout the story, he has to survive deadly runs into battle where he and others called bridgemen carry wooden bridges used by armies to cross the huge chasms between plateaus on the Shattered Plains. Kaladin has to battle his own inner demons while trying to unite his bridge crew and save the lives that he can. Then we have Shallan Davar, a light eyes from a financially destitute house on its last legs due to the actions of her late father. She's on a mission to become the pupil of a learned woman named Yasna Colin in order to steal this device from her called a soulcaster, in hopes that it will help pay off her family debts. While determined to save her house, she also has a passion for learning and a hunger for knowledge, and she has to choose between her house and her own desires. And then there's High Prince Dalinar Colin, a light eyes who is the aforementioned Yasna's uncle, as well as the brother of the late King Gavilar. He's considered by all to be a man of honor, and has become fascinated by the teachings put forth in this ancient text called The Way of Kings. He's overcome by these strange visions every time a high storm blows across the land, with this voice telling him kind of ominously to unite them. And he used to be all for the thrill of fighting in battle, but now he's debating the merits of continuing this war on the Shattered Plains and wondering if there isn't a better way to put an end to it all. And all these characters and their troubles are connected and part of something much larger, a cycle of desolations destined to repeat itself. And there's something dark looming on the horizon that threatens life on Roshar as everyone knows it. So, where to begin with my thoughts? I thought this book was fantastic. Loved every moment of it. I give it 5 out of 5 stars. The biggest thing I have to say about Way of Kings is that Sanderson's world building is insanely good. The setting of Roshar was familiar enough to me as a fantasy reader, but also foreign and unique enough for me to really feel like I was in another world, and these illustrations that are peppered throughout really heightened that experience. The main characters have a lot going on in their heads and in their hearts, and they make you feel something towards them. Like, it isn't always a positive feeling. Sometimes it's irritation or frustration, and it'll differ by reader, but you'll feel something for these characters nonetheless. Personally, Shalyn is especially relatable to me. She's probably my favorite character. She and I share a strong aversion to conflict, to the detriment of ourselves and our goals, to be honest. She has a much sharper tongue than I do, but she reminds me of myself in plenty of ways. I think they're all really interesting characters with more faults than not, and by the end of the book you're really wanting to see how they're going to develop further and what they're going to discover about themselves. And I'm only just scratching the surface of the depths of this book. There is so much that I could talk about, but this video would be like 45 minutes long if I tried to touch on like every relevant character, every side plot, every race and culture. There is a lot to learn and keep track of with this first book, and even when you start to learn about something, Brandon only gives you just enough info to keep the plot moving. Like, to name just a few examples, the magic system in Way of Kings is called surge binding, and it involves the user infusing themselves with a sort of energy collected during high storms called Stormlight, but you only get a brief glimpse of what it can do, mostly via this other important character who shows up kind of in spurts throughout the book, and each time you're kind of left kind of bewildered because it hasn't really been explained what's happening. The Parshendi people are really interesting and mysterious, and I was like really wanting to learn more about them, but I'm only given like an almost frustratingly superficial look into their culture, so I really wanted to know more, but you're not really given much more. The book is divided into parts, including interludes, and the interludes seem almost like random and unrelated to what's going on, but as you read, you kind of start to realize that in some form they help flesh out the world or concepts or characters and are likely to come up again in the future. The plot does feel a little meandering for a lot of it. You get the overarching idea of the war, the personal struggles of the main characters, and things like changing on a grand scale, but I found myself wondering, not unhappily, but just wondering like where it was all going exactly, how everything was going to connect. There are like plots within plots, and only, you know, read and find out. Only time will make things certain and more clear. And you get to see these characters, you get to know these characters, but it's hard to kind of see the end game for a lot of things for most of the book. And this isn't a bad thing. Like I said, I think that the writing and world building is so good and compelling that I didn't mind the slow buildup. And that kind of leads me to this, that Brandon Sanderson is a master of the slow reveal, and I don't want this to scare anyone like away from this book because it was incredible, but I would say that like if there was something that I might consider to be a negative for some readers, as you could probably surmise by what I've said so far, is that he likes to do a lot of setup and world building, which some people will find to be slow, while at the same time, as that slowness, as with a lot of high fantasy, it will probably also feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. There are so many names and places and concepts to process, and something that my friend Erica, or Books on YouTube, pointed out is that the book doesn't have like a dramatis personae or a timeline or a glossary to kind of help keep things straight. There is something called the Ars Arcanum at the back of the book, which is like a glossary, and it does explain some stuff about the magic system, but in relation to this first book, it's like the info in it is not really relevant and doesn't have very much useful information in helping you understand the plot or characters. This is a thick book. Like, it's thick. It's 1,000 pages long, and I would say that it isn't until about like 800 or so pages in that all of the beautiful setup finally starts to culminate to a huge finale, and things start to make sense and come together spectacularly. And Sanderson is so good at that, though. He's so good at it. With all of the books of his that I've read, his endings are just so exciting and cinematic and just make the long wait worth it. And honestly, the lead up is so rich and well written. I think that most people will have little trouble devouring the entire book and just drinking in the nuances of this world. You will have a lot of burning questions and some confusion along the way, like followed by a momentous and satisfying ending with a lot of, OMG moments where a lot of your questions are answered and secrets are revealed, but plenty are still left to entice you and for future books to address. If you want to see a really cool video with amazing visuals and narration all about the world of Roshar, check out the video Welcome to Roshar by the YouTube channel Invicta, which is well known for their history documentary videos. It's so good, and it will go over a lot of the things that I didn't want to include in this review because I don't want to make it too terribly long. There's so much. I think it's like a 20-minute video or something, a little less than 20 minutes, and it just goes over the world of Roshar, all of kind of some important elements of the world that I didn't mention but are still important because there's so much. I could go on and on about it. So final thoughts. I loved The Way of Kings. It has a rich world and interesting characters with a cool, epic plot. I can see how some might find it to be slow because there is so much setup. Practically the entire book feels like setup in a way because it's a foundation for the rest of the series, which I think is supposed to be like 10 books long. So if you like interesting and unique and well-developed fantasy worlds, you'll love it. If you crave lots of quick plot progression and have no patience for detailed world building, you might not like this as much, or you might find it a little hard to get through. But I would honestly suggest this to any lover of fantasy to at least give it a try, even if you fall into the group of people who kind of struggle with slow starts. It was so good, and I'm so excited to have a new world within the Cosmere to dive into. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read The Way of Kings. I feel like by this point, a lot of people have read this book, but I still see people discovering it for the first time just like me. So yeah, let me know if you've read it yet, or if you're planning on reading it, and your thoughts on the first installment of the Stormlight Archive. And I will see you again next time. Bye!